I finished writing this book in 2019, which seems like a really long time ago. But this is one of the reasons that there's not more about Joe Biden in it, who I think is also quite an identity capitalist. But in terms of Bernie Sanders, and I really think that the example can be maybe extrapolated to older white men in general. So maybe we can include Joe Biden in this as well. I mean, I think that there's a question. I think you describe it as a demand to prove your bona fides, and I think that's right. Like what have you done? Like what have you done for communities of color, right? And I mean, I think that this is an example of the type of behavior that could potentially satisfy the demand. I also think that it perhaps demonstrates the extent to which identity capitalism has affected the way that we think about race. Like, rather than examining some of these like substantive records, like what bills have they co-sponsored, what amendments, things like that. Like we look for photos and symbols, and who's sitting behind the person at their rallies, right? Rather than looking for things that are more substantive. And so this is one of the concerns that I have about identity capitalism more generally, is that it's having this, I would describe it as a somewhat corrosive effect on the way that we think about identity.
And I guess I mean, it's interesting because on some level, like, I think Joe Biden, it helped him with black voters, and that he was the vice president, the first black president. I mean, I think that really had a substantive value to voters in some fashion, and maybe it was, I mean, I guess on some level that is the idea, right? Like the identity and the diversity is commodified, and it's sold back to people as some type of a commodity that brings whatever product they're selling some value. Let me just lastly, because I think it's interesting in the end, in the conclusion, where you say we identity capitalists. You indict yourself on some level as well. Let me just talk about that because it's interesting on some level. Like it's impossible to escape it's impossible to escape on some level, right? I mean, at this stage.
I think that's absolutely right. Like, identity capitalism is absolutely woven into the fabric of our society. And so all of us have to make decisions about how we're going to participate in this system of identity capitalism. And I do indict myself at the end, as both an identity capitalist and as an identity entrepreneur. And I think that it's... one hope that I have for this book is that it will encourage people to reflect on how they too participate in identity capitalism and identity entrepreneurship. Without giving away too much about the end of the book, I mean, I will say that I've been in situations where somebody questioned my bona fides on something, right? And I found myself very tempted to point out that I actually write about anti-discrimination law, or that I have put a lot of my life into doing anti-racist work. But it would be wrong of me to do that, because that doesn't mean I'm not being problematic in a particular situation, right? And so this is the issue with the kind of thinking that I think that identity capitalism encourages. So identity capitalism encourages us to point to symbols, or to point to superficial things as evidence that we're not racist or that we're not being problematic in particular situations, whereas what we should be doing in particular situations is thinking about that situation and what our behavior is in that situation and whether we should be changing it in some way.
Is this a necessary phase, though? Because none of this, but the vast majority of it, we're talking like this commodification of diversity, would not have happened 60 years ago, let's say. I don't know. At least as broadly based. Do we need to go through this to get to that point of some type of real, more egalitarian, just society?
Yeah, I think it might be. And one of the reasons why I like capitalism as a metaphor for what's going on in this book is that if you have capital, you can reinvest it, and you can choose how to reinvest it. One way to reinvest the kind of capital that's derived in a system of identity capitalism would be to just keep it for yourself, right? Like to hoard your social capital or use it to make yourself literal money. Another way, right, like, so let's say that a company makes a lot of money as a result of an ad featuring a racially diverse family. Their sales spike. I mean, if they donate the profits from that ad or part of the profits from that ad to some sort of group that's doing good anti-racist work, that's a reinvestment in, like a society that is substantively better, not just aesthetically better. And so I think that's one of the reasons why capitalism works well as a metaphor here. But, to return to your original question, yeah, I mean, I think this might be a phase that we need, like, given where we are, this might be a phase that we need to kind of get through to get to something better.
Nancy Leon, the book is Identity Capitalists, the Powerful Insiders Who Exploit the Diversity to Maintain Inequality. Let me just ask one more question. Who are those powerful insiders?
So I come, obviously, from a background of law. And in law, we think about identity in terms of groups, right? So I'm not talking about individuals so much, but when we think about the groups that have traditionally held power on the basis of identity in the United States, we're talking about white people, we're talking about men, we're talking about rich people, we're talking about the able-bodied, we're talking about people who are straight or at least perform straightness, right? And so this is the group of people, or the groups of people who I'm talking about when I'm talking about powerful. Now, we all have complicated and multifaceted identities. That's what the whole idea of intersectionality is about. And there might be situations where somebody is powerful and privileged, and other situations where they're not. But the book really concentrates on situations where somebody's identity groups give them power and give them privilege, and what that allows them to do with respect to diversity.
It's fascinating stuff. Nancy Leon, the book is Identity Capitalists, the Powerful Insiders Who Exploit Diversity to Maintain Inequality. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.
All right, folks, going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Emma and I will finish this up.